All right, and welcome to the 28th episode of the Online Network of Independent Learning Professionals. Today we are speaking with Blair Enns. Is that how you say your last name, Blair?
That's right, yeah.
Oh, wow, got it the first time. Perfect. Okay, and so Blair was actually referred to us by Enns, and so I just want to turn it over to Enns for a second and just ask, like, what was it about, Blair or Win Without Pitching that kind of made you interested, or how did you guys get connected?
Yeah, thanks, Patty. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Cool. I'm not sharing my screen because I'm also having bandwidth issues, so just my voice today. But yeah, just to give Blair an intro, really, I kind of stumbled across Blair about 12 months ago, a few months into starting my own business, and I think I heard Blair speaking on a podcast. Really enjoyed listening to his point of view on how he approaches business development. Started reading some of his blogs, signed up to his email list, and then quite quickly after that, I think I read Win Without Pitching, which is, I think, Blair's. Well, you can probably correct me, Blair, if I'm wrong, but is your kind of your main book? Is it your only book, in fact?
Yeah, it's called the Win Without Pitching Manifesto. I have another book coming out at the end of this month, so I have a sneak preview picture of it at the end.
Cool. Really excited to hear about that. But yeah, I really enjoyed the book. I not only enjoyed the message that you were talking about, and the content of the actual book, but I really enjoyed the way you wrote as well, and that is something that really resonated with me. And I actually came to an event of yours about 2 months ago, probably, in London, where you came over and did an event in the centre. Mm-hmm. I think one of the comments that you made at that seminar was that it's really important to add your perspective and add your voice to the message. So not only just pump out, blog content, but add your perspective on it, and that will really resonate with your perfect customers. And I think that's what I find when I read your blogs, and when I read the Win Without Pitching Manifesto, is it's got a very distinctive voice. And I think you made the actual connection that if you were to remove the Win Without Pitching logo off your slides or off your blog post, you would still know that it's Win Without Pitching content because of the style of voice and the way it's been written. So that was something else that I really enjoyed from listening to you, and was really excited, to hear that you were happy to come on and speak to us, because I know that some of the other guys will really benefit from hearing your point of view, and really keen to hear what you've got to say.
That's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. And I'm going to turn it over to Blair here in just a second, but just really quickly, just like always, if you have questions as Blair is speaking, this is going to be a very popular topic. I mean, this is something that we always talk about, so I am sure there'll be tons of chat. Feel free to put your comments in the chat, and we will get to everyone's questions at the end. So over to you, Blair. Maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and what Win Without Pitching is.
Yeah, thank you very much, Patty, and thank you for the kind introduction, Ant. I'm really happy to be here today. I come out of, my background is, I'm a recovering consultant. I spent, I think, 12 years, a little bit more than 12 years working in the creative professions, which I define as essentially, it's the advertising, design, public relations space. That's kind of at the core of it. At the core of it's really the design space, at least the way I see it. And then as you move out there from there, advertising, public relations, etc. So I spent about a dozen years in business development, or new business development, which is our code in the creative professions for sales and marketing. So in new business development roles for some of the world's largest advertising agencies and some of its smallest design firms. About 15 years ago, I decided to launch a consulting practice called Win Without Pitching. And about 3.5 years ago, I started to experiment with the idea of a training company, offering a training service. In fact, I was trying to scale a solo consulting practice. Some of you might appreciate this. I was trying to scale a solo consulting practice, and every year, I would do a little bit more, business and revenue than I did the year before. And I kept kind of pushing it and pushing it. I never really got to the place in terms of the size of the impact or the reward that I really wanted to have. Don't get me wrong, I was doing decent on both fronts. But one day I lay in bed with pneumonia. It was the 4th time I had been sick on 3 continents that year. It was November of 2012. And I had the realization that my business model was trying to kill me. So I'd better kill it before it killed me first. So I started experimenting with training. Now I live in a remote mountain village in the middle of nowhere in British Columbia, Canada. If you know where Vancouver is, I'm a short 9-hour drive from Vancouver. I share an office with a grizzly bear biologist and a bat biologist. I'm not in the office right now. I'm in the studio where I do my audio and video production work. But I realized that consulting was difficult for a number of reasons. One of them was my location. My audience is worldwide. About 75% of it's in North America, and the remaining 25% is overseas, primarily the UK and Australia, but also in Europe and a little bit in Asia. So I tried to, I experimented with a 9-week online training program, facilitated by me, the coach. It went really well. I did another one that year. It went well. I did another one. I sold all 3 out. The next year I packaged them all together as a kind of a year-long commitment. That sold out. And then near the end of that second year, I decided I was caught between this customized service business, which is a consulting practice, and a productized service business, which was the training company. And I decided I really needed to choose, because everything I had read and then up until then experience told me that you can't really do both. You can't have both companies. It's one or the other. So I chose training. So the Win Without Pitching training program in its current incarnation is 3.5 years old. I've been doing it exclusively for just 2 years. I hired coaches about a year and a half ago, I guess. So there's 4 coaches, and we teach in multiple classrooms, firms from around the world. Now those firms are made up, they're primarily independent creative businesses. So we work with the owners of the business, the entrepreneur, and most of them are either design firms or advertising agencies or some of the hybrid between. We do have 2 e-learning firms in our program, one in Australia and one in the UK. We also have an association management company. We have change management consultants. We have people outside of the target market. So I guess on that point, I'll just kind of use that point to convey one of the things that I like to talk about. We're going to talk about positioning and how important positioning is to selling. And a lot of owners of businesses, and creative businesses in particular, because it's the strength of a creative mind to be able to bring new perspective to a problem. And therefore, they're drawn to the new perspective. So creative people want to solve the problem that they haven't previously solved. So they're always chasing something different. They tend to eschew narrow positioning because they want to reserve the right to do things differently. So the point I want to make is your target is always smaller than your market, if that makes sense. So you think of the target as that at which you aim. So in golf, you might aim for the pin or the flag, but you're happy to hit the green. And the pin is the target, the green is the market. And that might be a little counterintuitive to people. I really believe that your kind of stated market, those people that you serve, should actually be narrower than your reality. Because by being seen as compellingly different to a small group of people, others on the periphery of that group will find resonance in your message, and they will be drawn to you too. If you craft messaging that's tries to appeal to everybody in your market, you're going to broaden out a little bit too far. And again, that's a counterintuitive message. So if you're just starting out or thinking about launching your own business, it really is helpful to stake out a niche. And the niche can be kind of a vertical market. It can be a demographic market. There are different ways to define markets. It can be a geographic market. But you think about your market, you think about your target market, you aim for the target. The target is what you aim for, and the market is what you'd be happy to hit. if that makes sense. So as I said, we've got businesses that wouldn't fall under the kind of category of creative businesses or creative practices, but they see resonance in the message. And Ant very kindly referenced the book and the voice in the book. And when I wrote the book, I imagined an audience of one designer, a woman who owned a small design firm, 4 or 5 people, and she was my target. And I wrote everything to her, and there's been resonance well beyond that market. So that's there's a quick little segue. Let's talk about Win Without Pitching, the company, the training program, and then the philosophy, just a little bit about each. So the company, business development training for creative entrepreneurs and their teams. We don't work with firms where ownership is separated from management. And that just comes down to, when I identified how I was going to focus this business, when we facilitate this in our program, we have you choose a focus, discipline, what are you going to do, and market, who are you going to do it for? And you need to think about market in terms of who are you going to be a hero to? And, back to that one woman who owned a small design firm. I'm really driven by being the hero to that person because for me, the most meaningful thing is I see somebody in the creative professions who designs or creates anything for a living and then decides to make their creativity their enterprise. That is a vulnerable person because somebody has this gift that is creating. They decide they're going to take it into the marketplace. And now they're selling something that's highly personal to them. And usually they're not trained or skilled in selling. And therefore they feel very vulnerable. So for me, I always imagine that person in that vulnerable situation who's like put on this earth to create. But by virtue of the fact that she's turned this gift into a business, she's in these vulnerable situations where she needs a little bit of support. Our entire business is around supporting that person. And if others find resonance in our message and think that we can help them too, that's great. But it's business development for creative entrepreneurs. So when you start to separate ownership from management, I worked for some of the world's largest ad agencies. I'm not interested in helping the people that I was because my vulnerability in that situation as an employee of a large company is completely different from my vulnerability today as a business owner. And I'm really interested in helping the business owners and then their team. So if the owner is working with us, then we'll also provide some services to those on their team. The program is a year-long virtual classroom-based training program. That's all I'm going to say about it. There's the link if you want to look into it more. So let's talk about the philosophy. I want to talk about the philosophy and the approach for the next 15 or 20 minutes. Philosophically, I really want to make this point that I don't believe that free pitching is immoral, as some in the creative professions do. I'm often asked at the end of a talk, and it's often the first question, unless I head it off at the pass, Blair, what can we as an industry or a profession, and usually it's designers who ask this, do to combat free pitching, to rid the world of this scourge of free pitching? And I say, I think that's the wrong question. If you could learn to win without pitching while your competitors had this exorbitant high cost of sale and continue to give everything away for free, then wouldn't you rather exist in that world? Plus, I don't think it's immoral or wrong for clients to ask. The clients ask because they have the power, right? They ask you to give your thinking away as proof of your ability to solve their problem. They ask you to solve their problem as proof of your ability to solve the problem. And I'm assuming this translates to e-learning consultancies. I know it does to the 2 firms in our program right now. But they ask you to solve their problem or begin to solve their problem as proof of your ability to solve the problem. And it's just that, it's a request, but they have the power to do so. So part of what we do, if we think about winning without pitching, or the 2 steps to win without pitching, let's just get into that. I can distill, we can talk about many, many points within the arc of winning without pitching or the arc of new business development. We can take any point and probably go into it for a day or 2. But if I take the entire arc, the philosophy, and I distill it down into 2 steps, these are the 2 steps. The first step to winning without pitching is to gain power in the buy-sell relationship. So let me ask a rhetorical question because you're all muted and you can't answer, but power, who's got the power? When you're in when you're in a sales situation where you're coming together with the prospective buyer and you're both kind of working together, talking, determining whether or not there's a fit suitable enough between your expertise and their challenge to work together, one party typically has the most power in the relationship, right? And who is it? And if we could unmute you all, most of you would say it's typically the client has the power. And then the follow-up question is, okay, what is the source of the client's power? So just think about that. What's your answer to that question? The client has the power in the buy-sell relationship, right? He has the power to push you around, dictate price, impose an arduous or even ridiculous selection process on you, etc. So he has the power to do this. Most of us would agree with that. In most situations, that's what we encounter. So what's the source of his power? And most of you, if you think about it for a second, will probably come up with the answer. The source of his power is the fact that he or she has the money, right? But that's not the source of his power at all. If Bill Gates has a problem, Bill Gates, who has all the money in the world, has a problem, and he can't find anybody to help him solve that problem, then his money is useless to him in that situation, right? The client's power comes from it comes from the availability of substitutes. It comes from the fact that he imposes this ridiculous selection or procurement process on you. And his ability to do that stems from the fact that if you don't, as we say in North America, if you don't play ball, if you don't cooperate with him in his arduous, often ridiculous selection process, that's okay, because there are 4 or 5 or 4,500 other firms just like yours who will. Now, I'm guessing in the e-learning consultancy business, there probably aren't 4,500 direct competitors like there very easily would be in the branding business, in the graphic design business. But you're going to find as time goes on, and I'm sure many of you are finding this already, that the space is getting a little competitive. So the more competitive it is, the higher the competition density, the more power the client has to push you around, to put pressure on your pricing, to drive up your cost of sale by having these kind of ridiculous requirements of the things that you have to do to be able to run the business. So if we want to win without pitching, the first thing that we endeavor to do is try to get the power back in the buy-sell relationship, and we do that through positioning. So positioning is really an exercise in fundamental business strategy, which Michael Porter from Harvard Business School, probably the world's most foremost authority on business strategy. He designs strategy as this: the answer to the question, how are you going to become and remain unique? How are you going to become and remain unique, right? That is what's known as fundamental business strategy, what we in the creative professions call positioning. Because if you're not seen as unique, if you're not seen as meaningfully different, if you're seen as having a dozen or dozens of direct competitors who, in the eyes of the client, thinks, well, they could probably do exactly what you do, then you have no power in the buy-sell relationship. You know you have power in the buy-sell relationship when you're able to command 2 things simultaneously. Number one, a sales advantage. So when you're competing in your sweet spot, your area of focus, you win. And number 2, a price premium. So you win while charging more. So if you're winning while charging more, you know you're well positioned. And the third thing that you'll gain from being properly positioned is control, the ability to push back on a flawed selection process and change the way your services are bought and sold. So the first question really there's 2 steps. The first one is to gain power. The question is, how meaningfully different are you seen to be? So previously in my consulting practice and now in our training program, we spend the entire first term, the first 2 months on effectively this question: how do we make you different from your competitors so that you can carve out a competitive advantage, so that you can undertake the second step in winning without pitching? And the second step is, once you gain power through setting yourself apart from your competitors, now you start to push back. You leverage the power that you have. And you leverage in as few words as possible, you leverage the power you have by pushing back on a flawed selection process and affecting the buying process, changing the way the client goes about hiring your firm. So I don't know how ridiculous the procurement or the selection process is when it comes to e-learning services. But obviously, the more mature the market gets, the more dense the competitive environment, the more ridiculous the process is going to become as the client has more power and wields more power. So once you have some power, again, you position yourself so you're seen as meaningfully different. And that's that positioning. It's really a combination of focus focus is a combination of discipline and market. This is what we do. This is who we do it for. And there's some questions you want to ask around both of those. Who you do it for, like who are you going to be a hero to, right? I explained to you my thought process around the Win Without Pitching business about who we want to be a hero to. So you need to go through something similar. Now, Ant referenced something that I spoke about in London last month when I saw him, or a couple months ago. And that is this idea of perspective. That's really the third leg of the positioning tool. So what do you do? Who do you do it for? And then your perspective is, what is your overarching belief on how this should be done? Because proper positioning will set you apart from most of your competitors, but it will probably leave you with anywhere from 2 or 3 to maybe as many as a dozen direct competitors. And it's perspective, your overarching viewpoint on how this should be done, that will separate you from those remaining competitors. And it's also your perspective, and Ant made this point as well, the perspective is the lens through which you create content in a world of content marketing. There's a lot of content out there, right? There's a lot of thought leadership. Most of it lacks perspective, and therefore it's not very effective. So when you have those 3 things articulated, this is what we do, this is who we do it for, and this is our overarching belief on how this should be done, man, that is the positioning trifecta. Now you can begin to push back. And pushing back starts with saying no. And so I have a great phrase, word for word, that I like my clients to use. The first time when you're in a sale, you're talking to a prospective client or you're receiving an email, the first time you hear the letters RFP, and in some countries it might be tender or RFI, but RFP, request for proposal, the first time you hear those letters, you respond like a robot and you push back and say, we don't typically respond to RFPs. And then you stop and say nothing. Because what you're doing here is you're beginning to leverage, you're beginning to determine how much power you have, and then you're starting to leverage it. You're starting to push back. So this is the first data point. This is the first point at which you push back. Now you simply wait, right? You marinate in the uncomfortable to some, you'll get to enjoy it after a little bit of practice, silence that comes afterwards. Because what the client says after that first objection is going to give you all kinds of information about how much power you do or do not have to push back. It's going to, what the client says next is going to give you information about how different you are seen to be. Because if the client looks at you and thinks, oh, you guys are highly specialized in my space, I think I could get a product or an outcome that's better than, or significantly in some way meaningfully different than the other firms I'm considering. As soon as you push back, you should get this pause. Okay, well, if you're not going to respond to an RFP, then how do we proceed? That might be one response you get to that. If you get, well, if you don't respond to RFP, then there's no way we're going to work together. Good luck. Then that's a sign that you have very little power in the buy-sell relationship. Now you can say, hold on a second, from time to time we make exceptions. Let me just ask you a few more questions to keep the conversation going and see if you can kind of obtain the high ground in the relationship, get the client to see you as meaningfully different. But that's the first test, is you say, we don't typically respond to RFPs, and you just wait and listen to what happens next. So that's just one example of pushing back. It's so important. The next few slides here, I'm just going to demonstrate to you how important it is for you to push back in this way, because it's really giving you the indications, like orders of magnitude. It's giving you this really important information on how likely you are to win the business. So I'm conducting a study right now, but the study is based on 2 questions I submitted to a larger study done on subject of new business development for creative firms around the world. And the 2 questions I submitted were this: thinking of the most recent new business development opportunity that you won, start with loss, that you lost, to what extent did you affect the buying process? Did not affect, moderately affected, significantly affected. The second question is, thinking of the most recent new business development opportunity that you won, to what extent did you affect the buying process? Now you look at the results here, and there are different ways to interpret the results. But what's interesting is if you, on the far left here, if you did not affect the buying process at all, you're not likely to win. Your odds of winning a tender or a competitive selection process where you did not get some concessions granted to you, and I'll explain what I mean by affecting the buying process in a minute, but where you did not get some concessions granted to you and you didn't get the client to change the way they go about buying your services, your odds of winning are only 1 in 8. 1 in 8. Now, if you are able to significantly affect the buying process, your odds of winning are almost 9 out of 10. I mean, just think about that for a minute. And if you can moderately affect the buying process, there's a 29% greater likelihood that you're going to win the business than you are going to lose it. So 88% of all opportunities are won by firms that in some way, to some level, affected the buying process. And I would suggest that the implication is that almost all opportunities, higher than 88%, are won by the firm that affects the buying process the most. So I mean, these numbers just blow me away. We're diving deeper into it to get more data on it in a study that I'm running right now. But this research, preliminary research that I've done, is supported by a good book backed by excellent research. And the book is, I don't call it it's not a great book. It's a very good book. The research that underpins it is excellent. It's called The Challenger Sale. And if you're not familiar with the book, The Challenger Sale, what the researchers endeavored to do is to determine which profile of salesperson is most likely to succeed in a business-to-business sale. So you can see in the slide that there are 5 different types of salespeople. I'm not going to describe each type. You can get a sense of what that profile looks like by the name, the lone wolf, the hard worker, et cetera. And you can see in the light blue is the percentage so 23% of all of the salespeople measured were challengers, et cetera. And in the dark blue, they're showing the percentage of that profile, the percentage of high performers who came from that profile. So 39% of the top performers came from the challenger cohort. And this is not at all what the researchers thought they would find. They thought they were doing research that was going to prove that the relationship builder was by far the most effective salesperson. And so you've got this slide, but the most interesting slide is this one, because the slide on the right is showing across a large sample of B2B sales. And the slide on the left is showing the difference between a low complexity sale and a high complexity sale. And if you see at the bottom here, I can't see my cursor, but on the low complexity side, 20%, so percentage of total high performers, 20% of the high performers, the actual best performer in a low complexity B2B sale is the hard worker. But as the sale gets more complex, and you just think about what you do, what you're selling, and what all of my clients are selling. You're selling, like, at least in my clients' businesses, they're selling the contents of their heads, right? You're selling ideas and advice and these abstract things, and it's really hard to kind of ascertain value, and you've got to put together complex solutions for the clients. There's usually multiple decision makers. There's a lengthy sales process, et cetera. So the more complex it gets, the more the challenger excels. Like 54% of all of the top performers in the most complex sales come from this challenger cohort. So the authors of this book describe a challenger as somebody who adds value in the sale before they're hired by challenging the client's notion of what their problem is and what their solution might be. And I add to this, based on my own observation over 15 years, the third thing that you would challenge them on, and that is how they go about hiring a firm like yours. So what the challenger sale research and my own research from the previous slide shows is that when you can successfully push back on the client's number one, idea of what the problem is, idea of what the solutions they need to buy are, an idea of how to go about hiring a firm like yours, if you can push back on any or all three of those, you are significantly further ahead. You've dramatically increased your likelihood of winning the deal. Make sense? Great. Okay, I'm a little bit behind here. So Blair's game theory of new business. I mentioned I share an office with a couple of biologists, and biologists are big into evolutionary game theory. I'm not a game theoretician, whatever you call somebody who studies game theory. But it seems to me that game theory is probably the best model to use to think about this alternative approach to winning new business. So let me just get all the points up here. You think about so game theory is essentially how, it's the study of alternative strategies to win. In evolutionary game theory, it's the genes, it's about passing genes on through mating, right? And there's all kinds of competitions in which game theory is applied. Again, friends of mine are biologists, so I keep coming back to the evolutionary game theory idea. So you think about the environment, you're in an environment with multiple zero-sum games or competitions. So there's a whole bunch of competitions and there's zero-sum with winner takes all. There's no prize for second place, right? In the agency world where I come from, that agency world, we always said, well, the bad news is we didn't win the business. The good news is we came in second. Everybody comes in second and there's no prize for second. And the client tells everybody who didn't win, you came in second. So that's our environment. There's multiple competitions. There's zero sum. And the primary strategy that most firms in this environment employ is essentially the outwork strategy. We're going to enter as many competitions as we can. We're going to work as hard as we can on the RFP submissions. And it's just a volume game. We're going to win our share. I was speaking to one of my coaches last night who said he was meeting with a prospective client of his who's in the clinical research trial business for pharma companies, drug companies. And he said this company employed 500 FTEs, full-time equivalent employees, whose jobs were to respond to RFPs. 35 RFPs a week, 500 people employed to respond to RFPs. And so that's the outwork strategy. That's a company who said, you know what, it's a volume game. We're going to enter as many competitions as we can. We're going to work as hard as we can. We're going to win our share. That might work for you. And you might decide at the end of my talk in a few minutes that you're going to continue to employ the outwork, the primary strategy of outwork. Now, there's what I jokingly refer to as the sneaky copulator strategy. This references some late night conversations with my friend, the grizzly bear biologist, who talks about alternative mating strategies. The sneaky copulator is the one who kind of is on the side and sneaks in and does the business while the dominant male is busy defending his territory, right? So there are other strategies that employed in nature to pass on genes other than the dominant male wins. And what I'm proposing is the outmaneuver strategy rather than outwork. So the win without pitching approach is essentially this. You narrow your focus to something in which you can be an expert in, so you're seen as meaningfully different, and then you enter only those competitions whose rules you can change. Does that make sense? So what you do is you get invited to a competition, and the first thing you do is try to get the rules changed by creating an objection, by saying we don't typically respond to RFPs, we don't give our thinking away for free, et cetera. There's all kinds of obstacles and objections and pushing back that you can do. And next Thursday, I'm doing a webcast that's $49 if you go to winwithoutpitching.com called the 10 concessions, the 10 best concessions that you would ask for in this moment, 10 different ways to essentially try to affect the buying cycle. So you create this objection, you place a hurdle, might be another metaphor, in front of the client and ask them to leap over this hurdle. And if they grant a concession to you, maybe it's meeting with the decision makers when you're told the meeting isn't allowed. Maybe they allow you to alter your submission in some meaningful way. You get them to see the problem differently. These are all some examples of some concessions. If you get the concessions granted to you, these are the games that you play. And if you don't, you walk away in search of the next game. And if you do it this way, your odds of winning go from 1 in 8 when you don't affect the buying process to almost 9 out of 10. I mean, I'm horrible at math, but I'm good at math enough to know that you are crazy you are nuts if you do not take this advice and start pushing back. Build a meaningfully differentiated firm, and just in the beginning of the sale, push back, create obstacles. Get the client to demonstrate through their behavior, how they treat you, how meaningfully different they see you. And even if you're only partially successful, you're going to increase your likelihood of winning. There's a 29% greater chance of you winning the business than losing the business if you can get some a moderate concession granted to you. So I'm going to wrap up here, but I like to talk about the 4 P's of business development success. And I'm just talking about prioritizing, this idea of pushing back. So the first priority, sorry, it's not the 4 P's. It's the, because obviously these aren't P's. It's the 4 steps. It's the 4 priorities of winning new business, which starts with a P. The first priority is, wherever possible, win without pitching. And what I mean by that is, if you can build a reputation, be seen as the expert by the client, get invited into a conversation, and win the business before it gets to a defined selection process run by procurement, where you're asked to give your thinking away for free, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the goal. We're trying to win without pitching wherever possible. You publish thought leadership, you build reputation, you're invited into conversations, and you, through some moderate sales skills, you're able to secure the engagement before it gets to a competitive situation. So that's going to happen at a certain percentage of the time, depending on the business you're in, depending on the nature of your clients, whether you work for government, et cetera, et cetera. The second priority, when you cannot win without pitching, is to try to derail the pitch. And you try to derail the pitch through the means that I'm talking about. You create obstacles. You say, we don't typically respond to RFPs. Not in the business of giving our thinking away for free. We're not going to come out and stand up in front of a committee and tell you what you should do until you pay us to do that. And we have a mechanism for you to pay us to learn more about your situation, so we can tell you what to do. So the second priority is to try to get them to take their arduous, often ridiculous selection process, just put it aside and take an alternative next step with you. And usually you have to package up, well, here, let's just do this first thing together. And usually it's some form of diagnostic where you're being paid to understand, to scope out the situation. That's how you derail the pitch. Now, if you can't derail the pitch, the third priority is to try to gain the inside track. And that's really what I've been talking about up until now. Just get your firm treated differently. Have your client treat you differently. Words are nice, but we measure people's behavior, not their language. So it's great to hear, we really, really want to work with you. But we've got this procurement process we have to use. Please just participate in it. Short of a promise that you're going to be hired, but, the client confiding that, no, I really want to work with you. Just play ball with me here. It's great to hear that. You want some demonstrable proof of that belief, right? You want some behavioral concessions. So that's how you gain the inside track. And at some point, you get some concessions granted to you. You decide, you know what? This is one of the games that it makes sense for us to play because I have affected the buying process, even if moderately. And the fourth priority, if you can't win without pitching, if you cannot derail the pitch, you're unable to gain the inside track, the fourth priority is to walk away. Preserve your positioning, preserve future business opportunities with this organization, and know that in the long run, this is my perspective, in the long run, everybody's buying. The only variable is time, right? So those are the 4 priorities. I'm going to wrap up now. We'll take some questions. Ant mentioned my book, The Win Without Pitching Manifesto. Came out July 6th of 2010. It's almost 6 years old. You can find that on Amazon. Amazon.com, and you can find the Kindle version on most amazon.co.uk, .au, .ca, etc. Pricing Creativity, A Guide to Profit Beyond the Billable Hour is a book that I've got coming out some point in the next 35 days. Both these books are published through Rockbench. Pricing Creativity will not be available on Amazon. It will only be available on my website, and it's priced in the $100 to $200 range. It's a workbook. It's a working book where it takes you through the steps of understanding how you deliver value to your clients and helping you reinvent your pricing strategy so that you're able to command much, much more money by getting away from the idea of billable hours and other kind of mental constraints that limit us from financial success in business. So those are the 2 books. If you're interested in being notified about pricing creativity, please go to winwithoutpitching.com, sign up for our newsletter. You get an article every couple of weeks, and when the book comes out, we'll let you know. I'm at BLAIR'S on Twitter and LinkedIn. And that's it. I'll turn it over to you, Patty, to see if we have any questions.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. That is packed full of information. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. We do have a couple of questions, so I'm going to switch over to Enns for the first question.
Yeah, thanks very much for doing that, Blair. That was excellent. So my question is regarding something called road mapping, which is a technique that is advocated. I learned it first from a guy called Brennan Dunn, who you might be familiar with, he recently appeared as a guest on our weekly meetings, and he talks about something called road mapping, where you rather than pitching for work in a proposal process, you will actually sell the client on a sort of a paid discovery session, where you would go in, or you would do it virtually, and you would undertake a sort of discovery session where you find out what they're looking to achieve, the objectives of their project, the pain behind the reason why they want to undertake that project, and you do some diagnostic work, and you deliver a report, which kind of is essentially a proposal, but they've paid you for going through that process. I just wanted to know what your opinion of road mapping is, and whether you class that as upsetting the proposal process, essentially.
Yeah, if you can take a competitive situation where somebody is proposing, a client is proposing that they're going to give the entire engagement to the firm who comes in with the best bid, lowest price, and best solution. And you come to the table with what you call road mapping, or what I call a diagnostic sale, breaking it up into the first step and effectively getting paid to write a proposal. That qualifies as derailing the pitch outright. So anybody who's in, there are really two types of proposals that you have. So when you're in a situation where you have a client who has a common problem that you deal with all the time, and the solutions are actually quite simple, and you've seen this problem before, you know exactly what they should do, your proposal is oral. It's the words that come out of your mouth. You say, okay, well, yeah, here's how we do this, here's how long it takes, here's how much it costs. And typically, whenever you're delivering a price, you want to deliver options. So you could deliver a range, and you could come back with a one-page write-up on that. So that's the first page. So the first proposal is the oral proposal. Oh, here's what we would do. Here's how long it would take. Here's how much it would cost. And then you would have, because it's a fairly standardized product or service, you would have a one-page write-up on it, and you might support it. The only thing you would do to customize it is put together 3 different options, and I cover that in the pricing book. The second type of proposal, and the one that's more common, is where for you to be able to write a proposal or deliver a proposal, you need a whole bunch of information. You need to scope out the project. You need to understand the client. You need to understand the user. You need to understand the technology. You need to understand the goals, all of these things. So when you have to do a whole bunch of work to write a proposal, you need to get paid, or you should get paid to do that work. And you get paid by selling what I would call a diagnostic, and what this other gentleman would call road mapping, which is exactly, I love the term. So you're essentially saying, all right, so here's, so that first proposal is oral. You essentially have the same proposal for the roadmap or the diagnostic. You would say, okay, we can't scope this out. It's going to be hours of work for us. We have to interview you. We have to do all these things. We do that all the time. The way we do that is through this product we call X, the something discovery or assessment or analysis or diagnostic or roadmap or playbook or whatever. We come in your organization, we interview all these people, we get all this information, we put a plan in front of you with 3 options on how you might proceed depending on the variables and your budget. And for us to do that, it takes 4 to 6 weeks, and it costs $25,000 or whatever. So you're closing, again, it's an oral proposal to close on road mapping or a diagnostic, where you're essentially getting paid to write the larger proposal. So yeah, it's great advice. Applies universal across all knowledge businesses, and everybody should have a product like that, whether you call it, everybody should package up that scoping/diagnostic phase of how they begin their engagements. And they should make that available for sale to clients as the first step. Yeah, it's great advice.
Brilliant. Thanks for the answer on that.
Awesome. Yeah, that is great advice. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier really struck a chord with me, because I would definitely put myself in the relationship builder bucket. And so I saw, that obviously that is not the most effective way of starting off these conversations. And the challenger, seems, that to me, being a challenger, like, clients like to work with me because they say I'm easy to work with. And so being a challenger makes me feel like I'll actually lose clients. I mean, what are your thoughts about, how, have you seen anything like that where clients are like, you're too difficult to work with, like you put all these obstacles, blah.
Yeah. So I have an obscure assessment that I've run for almost 10 years now on all of the people that I work with. And so I can predict essentially how easy or difficult the kind of challenger or the win without pitching approach would be. And Patty, you're referencing what this test would call your affiliation score. So there's a model or a theory out there that says people are primarily motivated by there are three primary human motivations: the need to orchestrate others, the need to win versus others, and the need to connect with others. And so you have a high need to connect with others, which is directly linked to the need to be liked by others. Therefore, your cost of sale is going to be higher because people with high affiliation scores or needs they find it difficult to push back because they're worried about it coming across as rude. I have a very low affiliation score, as you might tell. So I'm not worried about being rude. I just wrote a big, long apology email last night to somebody I offended in our training program. First time that's happened in the program, but I had to apologize to everybody who witnessed it. It's not important for me to be liked, so it's easier for me to adopt this approach. What I would say is, so we all have our motivational makeups, our profile, and it's a really helpful thing to be aware of what your natural inclination is, because you know what your strengths are, and then your strengths become your weaknesses when you go to them too often or too readily. So you use your profile, the understanding of who you are, to put yourself in a situation where you're playing to your strengths. So I would say to you, your natural lead generation approach would be networking, social media, and events. I would say go to lots of events and leverage the fact that you're very good at building relationships. And then so that's overall, you play to your strengths. In specific situations, you want to be aware of the fact that high affiliation score is a weakness and you want to overcome it in the situation. And I would have you tell yourself, your idea of rudeness, of what constitutes rudeness versus standard business practice, is you just need to understand that your notion of it is probably really different from the person that you're dealing with. And affiliation needs in particular, I see like high affiliation people and low affiliation people clash in a sale. High affiliation people do really well at selling to other high affiliation people. And high affiliation people do poorly at selling to low affiliation people because they want to warm up the call with a big smile and talk about the weather. And somebody like me, my response is, get to the point. I have friends that I talk to about what I did on the weekend. You're not one of them. This is a business call. Let's get to the point. So you can see how those would clash. And then if it's a low affiliation salesperson like me selling to a high affiliation person, you need to channel some fake humanity. You need to put a smile on. I need to put a smile on my face. I need to demonstrate some personal. It's not like I'm not interested in somebody, but so over the long term, big picture, you put yourself in a position where you're allowed to play to your strengths. But in short-term situations, just remind yourself that, okay, this person doesn't need a friend. This person needs a solution. I actually have a mantra, like a tape that I have people play in their minds, like just a little thing. And some of my clients have it on their phone and they listen to it before they go into a situation. And part of it is, this person doesn't need a friend. This person needs a solution. So it's a great question. And it really is different from person to person, not just on the selling side, on the buying side.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And like you said, it's even just good that, it was a good reminder when I saw that in your slide, like, okay, this is what my natural tendency is. And so I can use it in this way, but to be aware of it, because like you said, it could be a weakness. And it is interesting. I always get a lot of, like, from my friends and things like that. It's like, you give too much away. Like, you can't, you're a business person now. You got to like run a business. So yeah.
Neil Rackham, who is the founder, he wrote Spin Selling. He's probably done the most research on B2B sales of anybody on the planet. He wrote a foreword to the book, The Challenger Sale. And he had this great line about just that issue. He said, the relationship is the reward for delivering value. And I think relationship builders think that if I get the relationship, I'll get the engagement, and then I'll be able to deliver value. And he references the research and he says, no, you need to think of it the other way around. You deliver value and then you'll get what you want, which is the relationship.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that. And then, the other question that I had is, so we've got a lot of different people that are in the group. Some of them, kind of have like little small agencies. So, they're working on larger projects. A lot of people though are just individual consultants. So it's just them. Would you say that this win without pitching approach is for everyone, or more so for, places that have more than one person in them, or how do you feel about that?
It's absolutely for everyone. The more legitimate kind of concern that I get is it harder as the firm gets bigger? And the answer is yes. As the firm gets bigger and you're more likely to be dealing with like procurement or government, et cetera, that gets more difficult. It doesn't mean the principles don't change. It just gets harder to win without pitching and derail the pitch. You can still derail and you can still affect the buying process, gain the inside track. But really, there's no real external condition under which, like the size of the firm, the state of the economy, how bad business is for you, that would kind of, in my mind, allow you to kind of dismiss these principles. Where the only thing that allows you to dismiss these principles is if you built a Me Too business. If you can, and I encounter this a lot. I'm sure there's some people on this call who are left thinking, nice theory, but that can't possibly apply in real life. I had somebody respond to one of my email newsletters saying, I've been in public relations 25 years and I've never won a business without pitching. This is like charlatanism. You're basically lying. It is. So he just, based on his own experience, he's never been seen by prospective clients or himself as having something that others do not have, and therefore cannot conceive of the idea of pushing back and on a flawed selection process. And then there are firms, there are people just do come to it naturally. I had somebody say to me, I would rather deliver pizzas than respond to RFPs.
Yeah. That's a good slogan right there. Yeah. We have time for one more question and then we'll conclude. So Ant gets the last question. Over to Ant.
Yeah. So the first step of Win Without Pitching that you explained in today's presentation was all focused around positioning. And I completely understand how that really provides that differentiation from your competition. If you could give one tip for moving into a situation where your business is positioned in a niche, one tip for the first step to move in that direction, what would it be?
The first tip I would give you for the first step is be afraid, be very afraid. Because when you're trying on a new positioning, a new value proposition for a new market or for an existing market, you should experience some terror at the size of the market that you're walking away from. And obviously, the smaller the business, the more appropriate this would be, the more appropriate it is for you to get even narrower. It's also a function of just competition density. But yeah, so if you're not feeling the fear initially, then you're probably not doing it right. The good news is, and there's an article on my website, if you can find it, it's called 10 Tests of Your Positioning. It's many years old now, but if you type 10 tests into the search window in winwithoutpitching.com, there's about 120,000 words of free advice on my website. You can find it. The first test is be afraid, be very afraid. The second test is you'll find yourself enthusiastic, because fear quickly gives way to enthusiasm, because for the first time you can envision, who you will serve, who you will be a hero to, and what you will do. And that's really inspiring. When you go from thinking, okay, we're going to provide all kinds of e-learning services to anybody who needs e-learning services, that's an overwhelming size of a market. My first job in business development, I was 22 years old, and the principal of the firm handed me responsibility. And I said, great, who do you want me to go after? And he said, that's the good news. We're a full service marketing communications firm. We do advertising, design, and public relations for large and small companies, government departments, and not-for-profit organizations. You can go after everyone. Now, the word everything has essentially the same meaning as nothing. That is debilitating to have somebody say, we can do all these things for all these organizations. You decide who you're going to go after. It's so much easier when I have this vision of this person who's in this situation, and I know who the person is, I know what the situation is, I know how I can help her. It's easier to get out of bed in the morning, it's easier to write, it's easier to create product, it's easier to have conversations, etc. So start with fear. If you're not feeling the fear, you're not doing it right.
Oh,
great.
Thank you. Incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah. The word everything essentially has the same meaning as nothing. I got chills.
A coach I was speaking to last night had another great phrase. I wish I'd said it, so I'll say I did say it. The riches are in the niches.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, this has really compelled me to actually take a look at my own website and the positioning, and to get a lot narrower. So great. Thank you so much. Everyone, let's thank Blair, chat love. This, it takes a long time to prepare a presentation like this, and we really appreciate you taking your entire hour out of your Thursday to talk to us. Such good messages. Alyssa says it was such a powerful session. Yeah, thank you. So we really appreciate it. Ann says it's the third time he's heard it and never gets old.
That's great. Thank you.
Yes. So thank you so much. And we'll go ahead and conclude now. So everybody, we'll see you here at the same time next week, same time, same place. And Blair, thanks again. And I'll be reaching out soon to follow up with you at just a couple of things for you. So great. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate the time.
Have a great week. See ya.